Hi, my name is Robert Scott and I'm an archaeologist. Now, quite a few of the comments that I get back on the Egypt video project is my qualifications and experience. So let's make a start. 1983, I was 14 years of age and I saw the series The Cleopatras, and it was quite shocking at the time from the point of view of how elites behaved with each other and with other people in their population. So I was quite intrigued, went along to the local library to try and get some books, and it was very limited then. Public libraries had a very limited reading list, and also what had been published back in the 1930s, 40s and 50s, and most of the books were out on loan in many other libraries, so it was very difficult to get information. In 1987, that was my first trip to Egypt. Flew into Luxor with Hayes and Jarvis. It was £259 for 2 weeks. I visited Luxor Temple, Karnak Temple, Deda Bakri, Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens, all those sites in Luxor. Then I travelled independently on the overnight bus up to Cairo, saw the pyramids, travelled from Cairo to Siwa Oasis, which was quite an amazing journey there and back on local travel. And then when I got back to Cairo, I travelled out to the Fayoum because I wanted to see the pyramid of Senusret first, and then back to Luxor. I did all that on local buses independently, and I loved every moment of it. But when I was at these sites, there was no information at all. So these sub-monuments stand silent, and that got me thinking. I wasn't quite sure what I was thinking about at that stage, but it got me thinking. So 1988-89, I was running a business. I was a family man. I was on 2 part-time courses. One was the Certificate of Management Studies. The other one was the HNC in Business and Finance. And I had this plan to be an accountant. Then the ERM crisis hit. Inflation went through the roof, interest rates went through the roof, and I couldn't get a placement to take my final exams to be an accountant. So I took a break and I went to Egypt for a break. So while I was in Egypt, I looked up a couple of old friends. One of them was a journalist in Cairo and sort of explained how I felt, a bit down. And he said, well, why don't you teach about ancient Egypt? You know as much as I do, and you've got a lot of passion for it, and you've been to these monuments, so why not do that? So in 1990, I started teaching ancient Egypt in adult education colleges, and I taught virtually in every centre in East and West Sussex. I remember my first class was in a place called Storrington, and I walked in there and there were 37 students. Well, in adult education, if you got 15, you were lucky. And I never did this before, so I said, yeah, okay, 35 will do, or 37. Another 2 joined. I think the class was 40, and that was the same for the first couple of years all over Sussex. I then started up the Sussex Egyptology Society, and I was getting lots of inquiries from schools, so I started developing a schooling programme. I also completed the Certificate of Teaching. I felt it was necessary to understand the processes of what I was doing in a structured way. So in this period, I had lots of ideas about the value of objects and how archaeology should be presented to the public and how archaeologists should engage with the public. The break came in 2002. An archaeologist that I know from York contacted me and said, did I know that there was an Egyptian collection in the Bexhill Museum in East Sussex and it hadn't been researched. So I contacted the museum. I offered my services to the museum. They allowed me to research the collection, but I knew that this had to be in an academic framework. So I also applied to the Institute of Archaeology, University College London. During the interview with Dr. David Jeffries, he said he was quite upfront with me. He said that he didn't think that this was a long enough project to be included in the PhD, and he suggested that I did an MA in Egyptian archaeology. So in my first year at the Institute, I did a qualifying year in Egyptian archaeology, and I published the Bexhill collection through a dissertation process. I was being drowned in all of these ideas that I had for 10 years, 10, 15 years. I could now develop them, I could now think about them, write about them, explore. It was such an exciting time for me. I was being supervised by Professor John Tate, and towards the end of this qualifying year, he said, you really should be thinking of doing your MA in public archaeology, because the way that you've investigated the collection and everything that you're doing is about the public and public engagement. So I transferred over onto the MA in public archaeology, and it was an amazing year. Amazing. The course leader for the MA in public archaeology is Tim Shad-Lahore. He's a British archaeologist, and he took us all over the country. Amazing museums and British archaeological sites. We went up to Scotland, we came down through Northumberland, went to Dorset, and it was amazing. I had a fantastic time. I'll never forget that 2 years at the Institute of Archaeology. I was attending lectures at the Institute. I made sure that I chose the right part of the course. I only had to go to university 2 days a week. The other 3 days a week I was teaching my schooling programme in schools around Sussex, and on average I was teaching between 2,000 to 3,000 children a year. And then on the weekends I was writing the assignments, so it was full on 7 days a week for 2 years, but I loved every moment. I was learning so much. So 2005 I completed the MA in public archaeology, and I was offered the post of associate tutor at the University of Sussex, which I gratefully accepted. It's always good to teach through university. It keeps you current, and I had ideas about archaeology and education and maybe doing a PhD study. In that same year that I accepted the associate tutor's position at the University of Sussex, Worthing College contacted me and said that they had a lady who taught the course. She was going on maternity leave, and would I cover the AS in archaeology? So again, this was a great opportunity. I'd never worked with post-16s before. It was always post-18s or primary school children. So I never actually had an experience of teaching at that age group. So for me it was a really good, valuable time. I was also developing School-Link. So originally School-Link started off as a 1 hour sort of lecture. I realised it didn't work. I introduced a handling workshop, which was very successful. Lots of role plays with clothing to get over the idea of how people lived every day and their belief system, which was the backbone of ancient Egypt. Then I offered a Greek School-Link program along the same lines, and that was extremely successful. And then I created the Roman School-Link workshop, which again was proving to be very successful. 2010 was a really bad year. The University of Sussex closed their department, so I lost my position there. The sixth form colleges stopped teaching archaeology as a subject. They wanted to condense their subject choice for post-16 students, so they get bigger classes. And then Michael Gove changed the national curriculum, which killed my schooling overnight. So I thought, well, I've had a really good run. It's 2015. It's time for me to retire from archaeology and call it a day. I fought the good fight. I've taken hundreds of groups of students to Egypt to view the monuments and learn from the monuments. I've had a great time. It's time to hang up the trowel. January this year, 2020, one of my sons comes to stay for 3 months. He lives in Thailand. He is involved in an internet platform. He explained what it was, and I'd had this idea 5 years earlier of developing an app which you could use on an archaeological site. The problem was, where I wanted to use it, which was Egypt, there was no internet connection, so I shelved it. But with the advancement of mobile phones, you can now download videos onto your phone. So I thought, wow, this is it. This is a way of people engaging with archaeology. So if I was to make a tour in Egypt from an archaeologist point of view, and knowing these sites so well, I can give that valuable information that a presenter or tour guide of archaeology may overlook. So you could provide this fantastic way of engaging the public with archaeology. So since January, I've made 127 videos on this idea. Really only about 15 of them are of the tour, because I realised early on that for you to understand pyramids, temples and tombs, you've got to know about the culture. So I thought, well, at the same time, I'll do different cultural topics, and then that rolled into the chronology, which is now up there. The other aspect of this is I wanted to keep this project simple. The idea is that you only use your phone and you only use affordable software, so you don't go for the pro level of cameras and microphones and things like that. The idea is that archaeologists in a developing country which have very limited resources can use their phones to record their knowledge of an archaeological site. And now I'm thinking, well, phones have GPSs, don't they? So let's say you were out in the countryside and you had your phone and you looked up the GPS. If an archaeologist had completed a fieldwork investigation and videoed it and loaded it up onto a national database, and there was an app which you could tap into with the your current GPS position. If an archaeologist had completed a survey with video and loaded it up to the database, then you could download that on your phone and know exactly what archaeology was in the vicinity. So isn't that amazing? Because the archaeology is all around us. It's just under the ground. And it's about finding out about the past people. Why is that important? Well, the past is where we came from. Our ancestors who passed on the legacies of different technologies and their belief systems and the way they lived and their value systems comes from our ancestors. Also, in the archaeological landscape, we are the custodians of the landscape. We pass through this landscape. People come and go, but the landscape is always there. So we are the custodians of our landscape, and we are the stewards of the natural environment and the historical environment, because in many ways people are now investigating their ancestry through DNA tests. And then one day, archaeology is going to be just as important to them because it can take them back to their ancient past. Sorry, I get a bit passionate. But that's who I am, Robert Scott. That's why I became an archaeologist, because I wanted to find out about the past. Okay, thanks a lot. Take care. See you soon. Bye for now.